you know, their gun belts, they've got badges, they've got, you know, patches on their arms, this, that, and the other. Asking them a casual question about something that's on their uniform, that's not evidence. And they answer it, not evidence, not something that you can consider. The only thing you can consider is what you heard in this courtroom. Answers that people give you to casual questions, even if it's a question that you're curious about, because as trials go on, sometimes jurors have told me at the end, you know, I had a question about this and nobody answered it during the trial. That's part of being in a trial. You still can't go get the answer somewhere else. So remember, you're confined to what you hear here in the courtroom. You've only heard part of the case. You need to keep an open mind until the end of the case. You'll get the jury instructions. I'll hand those over to you in writing and read them to you, and then you'll retire to consider your verdict. All right? So with that said, defense, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense would call Pat McKenna.
I'm sorry, Mr. Marrero. Who did you say you're calling?
Pat McKenna.
Thank you.
And, Your Honor, before Mr. McKenna takes the stand, we would like to move into evidence what's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit I for identification. It's a photograph that was produced by State's witness, Mr. Ruth from FDLE.
Okay.
Been previously shown to the State, obviously.
I didn't hear anything of the last thing you just said. It was marked, I heard all up to the State's witness, then you turned to look at the State and said something, and I missed it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Judge. I thought this was working pretty well. The photograph that we'd like to move into evidence was previously marked as Defense Identification I.
I got that.
It was testified to by State's witness, Mr. Ruth from FDLE, formerly from FDLE.
All right, so you're moving it into evidence?
Yes, we're moving it into evidence in our case.
No objection.
All right, this will be received without objections as Defense Exhibit Number 1. And if we could, Mr. McKenna, if you raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, sir. You may inquire.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please state your complete name for the record?
Patrick McKenna.
And how are you employed, sir?
I'm self-employed private investigator.
Private investigator?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could you give the jury a little bit about your background and your history as a private investigator?
Okay. After a career as a probation officer and in the public defender's office, I went into private practice around 1981, I believe. So I've been doing mostly criminal defense as an investigator.
Okay.
Some cases assisted prosecutors, but mostly.
So by my reckoning, that's 40 years at least, right?
I think it's 75, April 75 is when I started.
Oh, 75,
so whatever the
okay.
math is.
And how did you get involved in this case?
I was court appointed. Terry Lenneman asked the court to appoint me as an investigator.
And what tasks were you given to do? Specifically regarding the scene at the Walmart?
Photographs, video, some, what do you call it, drone video.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Approaching the witness with what's previously marked as Defense K for identification and Defense L for identification.
Okay.
Sir, can you describe what I just gave you, which is Defense L?
Yes, these look like the photographs that I took.
Mr. McKenna, can you pull that mic down?
I'm sorry.
A little bit? Thank you.
These appear to be the photographs that I took of the Walmart. And some shots in the parking lot above the Walmart, shots from the parking lot.
Okay.
These are all Walmart.
You personally took those photographs?
Yes.
And did the printed images fairly and accurately represent the photographs that you took?
Yes.
And when did you take those?
I want to say April of 19.
Okay. Of this year or last year? Or?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure the date. It's been
Might have
within
been a
the
couple
last year.
years ago.
I think it could have been a couple of years ago, yeah.
Okay. And as I said, the photographs accurately represent what you took
Yes.
at the time?
Yes.
The defense would move what's been previously marked as L for identification into evidence as the next number.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
This will be received without objections as as Defense Exhibit Number 2. It's one photograph, correct?
Right over here.
Mr. Marrera, it's
sorry?
one photograph.
It's a composite, Your Honor.
How many? All right, this is a composite exhibit of 15 photographs. Are they sequentially numbered? Sequentially numbered.
Publish this to the jury.
You may.
Sure.
All right, folks, take a look at them, and when you're done, pass them to the next juror.
Where's the picture?
You can pass them as you're looking at each photograph. You don't have to wait to go through the whole packet. You can pass individually.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'd also ask permission to publish what I just introduced as Defense 1 to the jury.
You may.
So while the jury's looking at these photographs, did you, sorry? What do you?
That's why she wanted to.
Okay. All right. I'll give them a minute.
Everyone on the jury get to see all the photographs? Oh, there's still one down there? Okay, no worries. I'm sorry, what? Sure. Okay. All right, come on up. Everyone done looking at photographs? All right, great, thank you. You may proceed.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Mr. McKenna, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as a defense K for identification. Can you describe that?
That's a disc of the videos, I believe, that we took.
Okay, that you took?
Yes.
And is there's some writing on the front of it?
Well, my initials, but it's got the name of my company, Markeith Loyd, Walmart Photos and Video.
Okay, did you produce that yourself?
Yes.
And is it a fair and accurate representation of the photographs that the jury just looked?
Yes.
In addition to some video that you took?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This time the defense would move defense K for identification into next number
Any objection?
3.
All right, this will be received without objection as defense exhibit number 3. Can you retrieve 2, Mr. Moreau? Can you retrieve number 2 from the juror? And number 1? Thanks. Thanks. Thank you.
And may I publish the videos to the jury?
You may.
So before I play these, Mr. McKenna, could you just briefly describe what's in them?
My recollection is we sent a drone up in the air, excuse me, a drone up in the air above the Walmart and captured as much north, south, east, and west from an overhead viewpoint.
Was any of it done with a hand camera as well, or do you know? Do you remember?
I believe this stuff here is mostly the drone work.
Okay.
There may be some from my cell phone, I'm not sure, I'd have to look again.
Your Honor, that's all the questions I have of this witness.
All right, thank you. Cross?
Good morning, sir. Just a couple questions.
Good morning.
The photos that the jury just saw in the videos, I
Yes, sir.
believe the timestamp on the videos showed that those things were taken on August 7th, right?
Correct.
That was in 2019, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that was about a little over 2.5 years after the incident that brings us here on January 9th of 17, right?
Did you say 2.5 years after?
Yes. If the incident happened January 9th of 2017, your photos were taken August 7th of 2019. It's about
Correct.
2.5 years.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. No other questions, Your Honor.
Redirect. May this witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
State.
No objection.
Thank you, Mr. McKenna. You are free
You're
to go. Call your next witness.
You take your mask off and just step up in the box. Hold that right, step up in the box, right, you're ready. Face the water.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Remove your mask. Fine. Speak correctly.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor, can the witness take her mask off?
She can. She's just getting set up. There you go.
Morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Could you please state your complete name for the record and spell your last name?
Anna Marie Cox, COX.
And how are you employed?
I own my own private consulting business.
And what do you consult in?
I consult in proper homicide processing procedures, chemical enhancement of latent fingerprints and blood detail, as well as blood stain pattern analysis.
And how long have you been doing that?
I've been a private consultant since June of 2013.
And what did you do before then?
Prior to that, I began my forensic career in January of 2000 at the Hillsborough County Medical Examiners. I was a volunteer autopsy technician where I assisted the doctors with the autopsies and preparation of evidence collected during the autopsy. In July of 2000, I was hired as a forensic science specialist, which is a fancy term for a crime scene technician, at the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office in the greater Tampa Bay area.
How long did you do that?
I was there for about 3 weeks shy of 13 years.
What sort of cases did you work with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office?
I was responsible for responding to everything from property crimes to explosions, terrorist attacks, multiple vehicle injuries, death investigations ranging from natural suicide to homicide investigations. I was a member of their major case response team because I had some additional specializations in other forensic disciplines, which I would then employ at certain scenes if it was necessary. So I was on call and responsible for being available to respond to major cases.
Did you also do any training?
Yes, I actually, at my time at the Sheriff's Office, I developed curriculum for training new forensic science specialists. I prepared the training on death investigation, proper collection procedures, chemical enhancement procedures. I was also responsible for authoring a training for deputy recruits. They were required to spend 8 hours with us at the forensic forensic section so that they could understand how to properly preserve evidence and how to protect a crime scene and the integrity until the response of the crime scene unit.
Okay. Now, could you tell the jury about your educational background and training that led you up to that position at the sheriff's office?
I have a Bachelor of Science from Juniata College, which I received in '94, and I had some basic coursework in chemistry, biology, physics, and their laboratory components. I received a certificate in crime scene technology from St. Petersburg. At that time, it was a junior college, and that was a certificate of 10 courses that were the fundamental for crime scene processing. So it was your photography, your basic processing, your crime scene safety, documentation, those types of courses. I obtained my graduate certificate in a death investigation from the University of Florida, and I believe it was 2013. That required 4 courses in advanced DNA serology, forensic anthropology, and I was required to take forensic medicine 1 and 2. I then obtained my master's degree in forensic science with an emphasis in death investigation from National University. And the difference between that graduate master's degree is that it's not laboratory-based, it is field-based. So it was additional advanced work with documentation, processing, understanding scene-specific variables in scenes. So it was very geared towards what I actually physically do on a daily basis.
Do you have any idea how many total hours of professional education you've had?
I have over 450 professional hours of education. That is typically done through places such as the Institute of Police Technology and Management. I've had training through the FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I've had training through agencies that have brought in private consultants who are educated in disciplines more so than I am, such as reconstruction or some type of digital evidence for those types of forensic disciplines that I'm continuing my education on.
Can you describe for the jury what your responsibilities are when you show up at a crime scene and how you evaluate the crime scene, how you detail the crime scene?
I do still actively respond to crime scenes. As a private consultant, I am still called out by local agencies to respond. And when I'm there in the capacity of a crime scene technician, it's my responsibility to identify, document, to locate, to process, to prepare the evidence to be packaged and for chain of custody. So I am responsible for that. I am proficient in the documentation processes of not only photography, but as well as sketching.
All right. Have you done any teaching on these subjects?
Yes, I began teaching at traditional brick and mortar. I began teaching at St. Petersburg Junior College in 2000, where I instructed on introduction to crime scene technology, advanced crime scene technology, and introduction to forensics. And I also teach at the Institute of Police Technology and Management. Recently began teaching there. And I also do a lot of guest speaking for local, for associations like the Florida Homicide Investigative Association. I've done a coursework for the University of South Florida's cold case conventions. So I not only teach professionally in a traditional brick and mortar, but I also guest speak and teach at local agencies where sometimes I'll physically go to the agency and do processing techniques for them so that they may be able to increase their knowledge of processing for their forensic evidence that they collect.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would move the court to, for permission to allow Ms. Cox to render opinions in the field of forensic crime scene investigation.
Do you wish to what, dear Mr. Buxman?
Can we approach, Your Honor?
You can.
right, Ms. Cox, could you tell the,
Hold on.
I'm sorry?
Court reporter's still setting up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Take your mask off, Mr. Maroon. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Cox, could you tell the jury how you got involved in this case?
I was contacted by Mr. Linneman in September of 2018.
All right, and what was your task?
He had asked me to do a case file review in reference to the crime scene processing that had occurred, referenced this incident, to take a look at the materials that were relevant to the documentation, collection, processing, and eventual chain of custody of the evidence that was collected in this case.
And what sort of files did you review?
May I refer to my report?
Oh, yes, please.
I reviewed several files that were specific to the processing techniques, which would include the crime scene photographs, autopsy photographs, additional evidence photographs. I looked at, there was Leica, which is a very high-tech scanning program. I took a look at those images. I viewed the video and the rooftop still shots from the Walmart. I also reviewed official law enforcement reports, including the reports of crime scene technicians, as well as some of the first responding law enforcement. I reviewed other official law enforcement programs, such as response, what they call the CAD report, crime scene logs, and any type of official laboratory reports as well.
Were you aware of all the evidence that was documented and collected from the scene of the homicide?
Yes.
And do you know, was all the evidence collected from that location?
There was, I am under the impression that all the evidence was collected, not all of it was documented.
So if it wasn't documented, then how did you find out about it?
That is part of the reason why I do read the official law enforcement reports, to include the crime scene technician reports, as that is a form of documentation process that as crime scene technicians we are taught. And in the subsequent report, I became aware of a possible projectile or a possible projectile fragment that had been collected but was never documented.
Did you obtain information about where that fragment was recovered?
Yes, I then continued to review case files, and of which I came across information from a detective, the individual who had identified the item, and that individual had indicated a approximate location of which the fragment projectile had been located.
Now, in photographs that the jury's seen earlier, there appear long yellow crime scene tapes. And did you see those in the photographs?
I did.
And did you become aware of the approximate sort of boundaries of where that tape was on the scene? In other words, what was included inside of the yellow tape and what was not?
Yes, I did.
Do you know where the bullet fragment was found, the projectile?
Upon reading the case file and that information from the detective, it was identified as being located outside of the perimeter. And having worked several crime scenes, I understood what the perimeter indicated. That's the exterior perimeter of the crime scene tape. And this individual also indicated that had been located down near the south entrance, which was several feet, yards away from the north entrance where the incident had occurred.
Now, there were no photographs actually documenting precisely where the projectile was located. Is that correct?
I have not seen any, not been presented with any.
So other than that general description that you just gave to the jury, did you have any other information about where the projectile was located?
No.
All right. Did you know that the detective had contacted a crime scene investigator regarding the finding of that projectile?
I did read that in the case file review, yes.
Do you know if any crime scene investigator responded to the detective's call?
They did not.
Is that appropriate documentation?
I did not feel like that was appropriate. Not only was it located on the same day, it was confirmed that a shooting incident had occurred there that day, and it is not uncommon in an outdoor scene when there's multiple rounds discharged from a weapon that there may be some evidence that's outside of the perimeter that is not uncommon based on the general variables of that scene, the scene-specific variables. So it's not uncommon for that to occur. So in response to that, it's not uncommon to be called back to a scene to continue the documentation that you had already previously begun for that investigation. That did not occur in this particular instance.
Now, one of the crime scene techs did respond back to the scene later, is that correct?
2 times later.
Okay, but in neither one of those events was the projectile's location documented?
There were several additional photographs taken, but the report only indicated that this individual had responded back to the location. It did not provide any information on the directive of the reason or what they had intended to document.
All right. After you reviewed all the documentation and data in this case, did you ever visit the crime scene?
I did.
And what did you do? What did you do there, and why did you do it?
If I have the opportunity, there's, in addition to responding to active crime scenes, there are times when I am not afforded the opportunity as an agency or an investigative service may not realize that they need some extra expertise. So it's not uncommon for me to get called into a case after a crime scene has been released, and I've been called in several years later to several other types of scenes that are considered to be cold cases. So if I have the opportunity to respond to the original location, I will do that. And I do that to see if, typically just to get a spatial feel for the area, because although documentation is done at different angles, you really sometimes can't get a feel for how large or how small an environment is. The other thing is, this being an outdoor scene and it being a commercial business, there's a lot of other scene-specific variables, such as pillars, that would impede somebody from driving up into the pedestrian area. So there's all those types of variables that may not necessarily every single inch of them be documented in a photograph. So I go there in order to do that. I also, in this particular situation, went there because I was honestly confused as to how that projectile or possible projectile fragment had ended up by the south doors. So knowing that it was an outdoor scene and that there were multiple rounds discharged, I just wanted to walk around the Walmart to see, is there any indication, can I find anything that might allow me to determine possibly how this projectile or possible projectile fragment ended up near the south doors of this particular location.
And were you able to find anything?
Yes, I identified what I believe to be a possible defect, sometimes called strike marks.
And did you document that strike mark?
I did.
And when you came back to your office, did you attempt to locate any photographs taken by law enforcement to see if you could locate that strike mark on their photographs?
Yes, so the process that, when I do a case file review, it's a fluid process. So when I obtain information, and I like to just kind of describe it as a cone, and the base of the cone is very wide and you have a lot of information and you're not quite sure where the evidence is going. And so then you do a little bit more reading and a more case file review, so you can kind of go up the cone a little bit to get a better understanding of that particular incident. So once I had identified what I perceived to be the defect, I went back and I thought, okay, well, let me see if I can identify this in any of the photographs that were taken the 3 times that the agency responded. And I did locate a photograph of which the strike mark or possible strike mark was visible in one of the photographs.
Did you do anything to that photograph to enhance the appearance of the strike mark so it was more easily visible?
I did, actually. There's non-invasive techniques because there were no what we consider to be mid-range or close-up photographs of the strike mark in any of the photographs that I observed. So what I had to do was take every single photograph and I had to identify if that window frame of which I identified the strike mark was visible in that photograph. If the window frame was visible in that photograph, then I would very slowly zoom into it. And depending on the resolution, sometimes what we call pixelation would make the photograph too blurry to see anything. So I had to systematically go through all these different photographs until I finally found one where I was able to zoom in just enough that I felt comfortable saying that the location of it, the relative appearance of it, and the overall photograph was consistent with what I had physically seen at the scene. And that is all done, and then I crop it. And then sometimes I'll use different lighting. All of this is non-invasive. I'm not altering the actual original photograph. I keep the original photograph, make a copy so that these non-invasive techniques are not done on the original copy, so that the integrity of that original photograph is still maintained.
So what was it about this defect that you observed and documented that drew your attention?
I have worked hundreds and hundreds of shooting incidents, and I am familiar with strike marks and different types of surfaces. So when
you say strike marks, you mean precisely what?
From a possible projectile or projectile fragment.
From a weapon?
From a discharge of a weapon.
Okay.
And so when I went to the Walmart, and I looked from all the way from the north end all the way to the south end, looking up and down on the pillars, on the windows, on the ground, looking everywhere. And that was the only defect that I observed, and it was within the alcove in close proximity to the north entrance doors. So that was why the importance of that particular strike mark, or that defect.
Okay. Now, did you find any sketches or additional Leica scans that addressed that mark, that defect? Was there anything in the state's evidence, in the documentation that you reviewed, besides that photograph, that documented that strike mark?
No, I did not receive any additional Leica scans where that strike mark was intentionally diagrammed, no.
Okay. Did you took photographs of your own, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you do anything besides taking photographs of the scene?
After I took the photographs and returned to my office and did some more case file review, I then read more in depth the statement of the detective who identified the possible projectile, and I remembered that he had made a reference to the fact that the projectile might have been close to an unmarked vehicle. He wasn't sure, so I'm taking all this information in, and then I thought that I would view the rooftop stills and the video in much more detail to see at that point if I could possibly see if there was any continuity between the incident and the location of this new defect and the location of the projectile.
Okay, did you draw up any sketches or anything of that kind?
Yes, I actually responded back to the Walmart a second time, and I intentionally went early in the morning because my intention was to do a video from a perspective of the rooftop stills that was unclear to me. Some of the original video from the Walmart and the rooftop stills was obscured by signage on some of the pillars, and I did not find adequate photographs that had been taken by the agency that would allow me to determine if there was even something what would be considered line of sight based on the two areas of which the video was not clear.
Okay, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Ma'am, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as defense M for identification. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a CD of my videos as well as some sketches and the photograph that I identified.
There's some initials on the front, and there's some evidence tape on the back. Did you put those there?
Yes,
Did you create this exhibit?
I did.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense will move and for identification and evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, this will be received without objection as defense exhibit number 4.
And hands you pair of scissors, if you could open it for me. This is in exactly the same condition as it was when you sealed it up?
Yes.
Could you open it up for me? The photographs and videos to the jury.
You may.
Okay. The first image that's being shown is very small. Do you recognize that image?
Yes.
And what is it?
That is the cropped version of the photograph taken the second time the agency responded to the Walmart. That is the window frame, and there is what appears to be a shadow area. If you're looking at the photograph, it's immediately to the right of the pillar, and it is above what would be considered the sill or the shelf of the window. It's on the actual lower frame of the window. That is what I identified as the defect.
Now, you said cropped, so this is a small portion of a larger photograph that was taken by, probably by CSI Livelihood, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you cropped it down just to the important part, or the part that you deemed to be important, is that correct?
Correct.
But you didn't otherwise alter the photograph or change any aspect of it, is that correct?
I did not.
Is this the original photograph?
That is not the original photograph. That is, I have actually cropped, but not as closely. So this would be considered a mid-range view of the potential defect. And this is, I've also not only cropped it from the original photograph, but I've lightened it so that you have more of a contrast and the actual shadowed area becomes more visible. And it's, as you can see, once again, to the right of the pillar, and it's on the actual window frame, not the windowsill.
How about this photograph?
That is the original photograph.
Okay. So we kind of showed them in reverse order. This is the photograph originally. You were able to spot on this photograph that defect on that window frame?
Yes.
Did you spot it on the photograph before you saw it in person, or did you see it in person first and then try to locate it in the photograph?
I saw it in person first.
The record reflect on board shown state defense and for identification and applications.
You may.
Ma'am, could you describe what I just handed to you?
These are my photographs of the defect.
And do those photographs accurately and fairly represent the scene as you saw it and observed and photographed it the day that you took it?
Yes.
And when was that?
I responded and took these photographs on October 2nd of 2019.
Do they still appear to be in the same condition, or the defect appear to be in the same condition as it did in the state's photographs that were done by the crime scene investigator who responded to the scene on the day of the event?
The location of it, these are my close-up photographs, and previous photographs to these close-ups. This defect is in the same location that I found when I went back and reviewed this particular photograph.
At this time, the defense would move defense N into evidence as the next number, and proffer to the jury.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, this will be received without objection as defense exhibit number 5. It's a composite exhibit consisting of how many photographs? Is it 3 photographs? All right, composite exhibit, 3 photographs sequentially numbered. Okay. And you may publish. Same procedure as before, folks.
Now, Ms. Cox, what was it about that defect that made you photograph it so closely and made you be interested in it?
The initial thing that drew my interest was it was the only defect that I found to that metal framing on any of the windows at the Walmart. So when I first identified the defect, I wanted to make sure that this was not a manufacturing issue with this particular type of framing. So I was drawn to it because of that there was no other defects that I could attribute to a manufacturing issue. Then what drew my attention was the size of the defect and its location and proximity to the location where the incident had occurred. The other thing that was of interest to me was the fact that it did appear to be what is considered to be a possible strike mark, which means it had characteristics that were consistent in appearance with what's called a ricochet, which basically is consistent with an item coming into contact with a surface and for lack of a better term, bouncing off, as opposed to entering that particular item. So then an accumulation with the fact that there was, in fact, a possible projectile or fragment located on the same day of the incident that was over by the south entrance, all of that accumulated together is what, and the fact that there had been weapons discharged and the fact that a shooting incident was not in dispute, that was what really brought my attention to that particular defect.
Is there anything in particular about those images that look like a bullet, like it was struck by a projectile, a bullet?
It's consistent in appearance with other scenes that I've worked where metal-based items have been struck by projectiles.
And how high up off the ground was the bottom of the window frame?
I actually did put a measuring device in there to memorialize that in my overall photographs. It was a little bit higher than 4 feet. And the interesting thing also was that it was in the inset alcove. And once again, it was not on the window sill that protruded out. It was actually on the frame so that the window itself is inset. And there's a little window sill that comes out. It was in that particular area.
Did you observe the shopping carts that were at Walmart?
I did. As a matter of fact, when I took my original photographs, there was a shopping cart almost right next to the window upon my arrival.
And the mark is where in relationship to a shopping cart?
It's above. It's a few inches
So it couldn't have
above.
been caused by a shopping cart. Is what
Somebody would have had to pick up the shopping cart and swing it into that area because the windowsill protruded out and the actual defect was higher than your traditional shopping cart.
And there's a roof over that window as well, so it's like sort of protected from the elements to some extent?
Yes, there's a small awning that protrudes out.
Okay, so we talked earlier about some sketches that you made, and I think you said that the reason that you made these sketches was to try to see if there was a line of sight.
Yes.
And could you just go into a little bit more detail with the jury about what that is?
Line of sight in basic generic terms is whether or not if a normal individual was in a location and looking in a certain direction and the end target was visible and unobstructed. So that would be what a line of sight is. So that's what I was attempting to determine was there were 2 frames of the video that I was not sure because they were obstructed by some signs, so I did my own documentation to determine whether it was or whether it wasn't available.
So is it fair to say that you were trying to figure out if either one of the shooters could have had a clear shot to that window?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we have up on the screen a sketch that says sketch parking lot. Did you create this sketch?
I did.
And could you describe it to the jury?
That is a very small sketch version of the actual Walmart, which is a very large Walmart. And as you can see, it's not to scale, so these are not, the sizes of the items are not meant to be mathematically correct. It is for demonstrative purposes only. So this is a process of which I used in conjunction with all of my case file review, as well as visiting the Walmart myself and reading the different statements and reports of individuals. And I did what is called a layering sketch. So what I did was I identified, based on the photographs and the Leica scans, where the individual vehicles are related to this particular scene. Now, there were other vehicles at that location, but the reason that I only selected the law enforcement vehicles is because that was a reference that was made by the detective in the information in the case file, that he thought that it was possibly near an unmarked cruiser, but couldn't be sure. So what I did was I identified the unmarked cruisers, which have little arrows that say unmarked police cruiser, and then the other cruisers just say police cruiser, and that would have been a marked unit. So I identified the location of all those vehicles. The next thing I did was, because I had no documentation, either in report form or photographs of exactly where that fragment was located, I had to consider an area as opposed to a point. So what I had to do is determine if that possible strike mark was in fact caused by a projectile, possibly this projectile, what would be my possible ricochet area? So that is what this particular area is. My dimensions, you'll see I have one long purple line that goes from possible strike mark towards the south edge of the building. That is going to be considered one of the outer perimeters of the possible ricochet area. That's based on the structure itself. The line that goes straight down the middle, that's a purple line that goes straight down the middle from the possible strike mark, goes down along a police cruiser line, and that perimeter, or that ricochet perimeter, was determined based on, once again, that it was identified as being outside of the perimeter, and that crime scene tape in the photographs and the Leica scans, the furthest south perimeter was over that vehicle. So that's how the possible ricochet area was determined. And based on that, you can see that all of those police cruisers towards the south are in proximity of the possible ricochet area.
So, okay, so the purple line that goes straight up and down in the image, that is where the crime scene tape was, which was the outer perimeter, as you said, of the actual crime scene?
That line is not the actual crime scene tape. The tape actually went across the vehicle and then a little bit over to the left. But for the purposes of the ricochet area, I made it a straight line.
Okay, so, and then the purple line that comes off of the wall, that's not, you didn't put that line in there to say that that is absolutely the trajectory of this bullet fragment, is that correct?
No, this is a ricochet area, not an absolute trajectory.
So when the purple line goes all the way to one of the unmarked patrol vehicles, you testified earlier, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that could have been the vehicle where the projectile was found, but you don't know.
Correct.
It could have been one of the other unmarked police cruisers, but you don't know that either, right?
Correct.
Because it wasn't documented.
Correct.
And so essentially, is that purple line just to show that there's a clear shot, for lack of a better word, from where the fragment might have been found and to that where you found the strike mark?
Yes, I felt that if in fact that was a projectile that had caused that strike mark, that where the projectile was identified through the case file review would have fallen within the plausible ricochet area that I identified on my sketch.
In other words, like if that fragment had been found all the way past the home and living part of the store on the other side of that wall, it couldn't possibly have bounced off of that wall. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Okay, now this next image sketch is titled Sketch Parking Lot with Possible Line of Sight and Ricochet Area. So it looks a lot like the last one that we looked at, but you added some things.
Correct. This is the second layer, my second layer sketch, where I have now, based on when I responded back to the Walmart to do my video, I established that there was a line of sight available from the original areas at the beginning of the incident that were not clear on the Walmart video or the Walmart still shots. So because I didn't have any other additional documentation, I created my own based on all of those scene-specific dynamics. And once again, this is not to scale, and it is approximate, but it does document the location of Lieutenant Clayton and of Markeith Loyd based on those still shots. And that is how I came to determine those approximate locations of those two individuals, and both were within the line of sight of the possible strike mark.
And that's what the blue line that's off, I guess it would be like around 8 o'clock on a clock.
Correct.
That's what that line indicates? That
Correct.
there's a clear view from where Lieutenant Clayton was all the way to the strike mark.
Yes.
Okay, and this sketch is titled Front View Sketch, No Possible Line of Sight. Could you describe that?
This is just a different perspective as opposed to looking down on the sketch. This is more of a front view as if you were standing facing the Walmart. And once again, it's not to scale, it is approximate. And this is the first layer sketch where I've just identified the approximate locations of the individuals. And then I took a snapshot of my actual photograph of the strike mark, and I placed it in there with possible strike mark to identify the location of it as if you were looking forward.
Now, when you say or title it No Possible Line of Sight, you mean you just didn't put in a line of sight in this image, in this sketch?
Correct. This is the first layer sketch.
And this image appears to be similar, except you've added something.
Correct. I've added the possible line of sight.
And again, this is simply to show the jury that from where you know Lieutenant Clayton was at one point, because the video obviously obscures, there's plenty of parts on the video that obscures either or both of them. Is that correct?
Yes, so I viewed all of it, all of the still shots and video.
But it's essentially, you're showing here that from where you have, and I'm assuming that the female sort of looking dummy that shows up on this image, that's where Lieutenant Clayton was?
Correct.
And then the male one is Markeith Loyd?
Correct.
And you're showing that from where she was standing there, she had a clear shot all the way to the possible strike mark?
There was an unobstructed line of sight.
Now, you also made a PowerPoint video
Yes.
or a presentation, shall I say?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell the jury what we're looking at?
That is the first slide of this presentation, and that is the rooftop still shot that I was looking at in order to determine the approximate location of Lieutenant Clayton and Markeith Loyd at the beginning of the incident. And this slide was chosen because there were no photographs taken by the law enforcement that were taken from that perspective, which is one of the reasons I chose that slide and did additional work on my own.
Now, you know, we keep talking about the line of sight, but you don't actually know whether or not Lieutenant Clayton fired, just from looking at this picture, whether or not she fired at that window. Is that correct?
I do not, no.
There's no images actually that you reviewed that show her discharging her weapon in such a way that it could have hit that window?
No.
But it's possible?
Based on everything that I've reviewed and additional information I've obtained, I cannot eliminate that the line of sight was available.
And the next frame?
That was the second frame, of which I was unable to find any documentation done the day of the incident or after the incident that provided me whether or not the line of sight was visible from that perspective. As the still shots and video continues, the movement of Lieutenant Clayton becomes much more, is not as obstructed by these signs, and those perspectives were already documented by the law enforcement agency. So these were the particular slides of which I felt that I needed to do additional work because they had not been documented.
And you used these images to help you construct the sketches that we just saw?
Correct.
On the next slide.
That is just the photograph that was taken the day of the Walmart of the incident. You can see the law enforcement personnel is still present. And I just wanted to document that as you go further in this presentation, that the structure of the Walmart itself had not changed. That's the reason that an original photograph was placed in that presentation.
All right. This appears to be the same photograph, but you've added things to the next frame.
Correct. I've identified the individual who took the photograph, the fact that it was a scene photograph, the fact that it was, in fact, I gave it its designated number that was assigned by the law enforcement agency, and I do indicate that that is a cropped, that is not the original photograph, that is a cropped version of the original photograph.
What about the white characters that show up in the photograph?
Those were placed in there by myself.
And what did you use to establish their placement?
The first two slides, that is the approximate location in the first two slides.
And you wrote in yellow letters here, possible strike mark with a yellow oval. You put that on there?
Correct, to identify the location of it on the window frame.
Okay, and this image, which is DSC 005?
That was taken the second time the third time the response was made by the law enforcement agency. And I included that in there because it was one of the few that was kind of close to the line of sight that I was trying to find, but it just didn't give the exact reference points that I was looking for. But I did want to put that in there to demonstrate that.
All right, this image looks like identical to the last one, except you've added something?
Yes, I have added the demonstrative mannequins representing Lieutenant Clayton as well as Markeith Loyd and the possible strike mark.
And this next frame?
I took 4 series of videos, and that is the first video that I took from the approximate location of Lieutenant Clayton in the 2 frames. It's an approximate location of the 2 just to demonstrate that the line of sight was visible from both.
And on the bottom of the photograph or the video frame, it says that it was taken on August 19th, 2020 at 6:30 in the morning?
Yes.
Why'd you take it at 6:30 in the morning?
I was aware that the original incident had occurred early in the morning, so I wanted to make sure that I was respectful of the possible changes in lighting and the fact that it was dusk. I believe the sun had just risen the day of the incident, but I went there prior to the Walmart opening order to be respectful of their business and to not impede their business activity, but to be respectful of the fact that the incident had occurred in the morning.
Are you walking or are you using a Zoom?
No, use a Zoom.
And what are you zooming in on?
The line of sight and ultimately the location of the projectile, possible projectile strike.
And the next video is taken the same day, around the same time?
Correct.
And what do you document there?
At this point, I've moved to the approximate location of Markeith Loyd, as documented in the still shots, and I am once again documenting that the line of sight continues and is unobstructed.
And I guess this doesn't need any description. You put on the image, a snapshot of video, defect visible.
Correct.
And this one?
That is, at this point, I am now standing in close proximity in front of the possible strike mark, and I am taking the video outward away from the strike mark towards the road to provide a different perspective.
The next photograph, same thing?
That's a snapshot of the video.
Okay. Same photograph, now you've added something?
Correct. That is demonstrative to just provide a different perspective, a different demonstrative perspective.
All right. And that's the end of your presentation on this?
Correct. Yes.
Now, since the last time that you were deposed, we've taken in evidence in this case. We've had testimony. And you and I have spoken, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did I share with you any testimony from this week's evidence?
You did.
And what testimony was that?
You provided me testimony from the ballistics expert that testified in reference to the projectile and its possible inclusion or exclusion of a weapon.
And do you have an opinion about that now, based on what you already knew and based on what you've heard from the testimony of the expert, Mr. Ruth, who testified?
Object, Your Honor. Opinion about what?
Sustain. Yeah.
Has anything that you've heard since you were deposed changed your opinion about what that defect was and the line of sight?
Some of the information that was provided through this testimony was specifically relevant to the actual condition of the projectile, as well as what weapon it could be excluded from and what weapon could not be excluded. With that additional information, that has brought my case file review even further up on the cone. So I would indicate that the discharge of Lieutenant Clayton's weapon toward the Walmart cannot be excluded.
The condition of the bullet fragment and the testimony that came in about the condition of the bullet fragment, was that consistent with your, your indication of the defect itself off the window? In other words, if Mr. Ruth testified that that bullet fragment was severely damaged as though it had bounced off of something, was that consistent with the defect that you found on the window frame?
Yes, that is one of the primary pieces of the testimony that I considered.
And if Mr. Ruth's testimony was also that the projectile could have been fired from a weapon similar to Lieutenant Clayton's, and that the characteristics of the projectile were consistent with the ammunition that was loaded in her gun, would that also add to your feeling that this actually was a bullet ricochet?
That does provide more probative value to the fact that I cannot exclude that this is a projectile strike mark.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Cross.
Good morning, Ms. Cox.
Good morning.
Can you leave that up? Oh, yeah, thank you. Now, referring to the defect that you've been talking about on the windowsill at Walmart, you cannot say that it is a strike mark from a projectile, correct?
I can't say it definitively is. I also cannot exclude it.
And that is why you continually use on your diagrams and your testimony as a possible strike mark, correct?
Correct.
And if it is a strike mark, you cannot say when it was placed there, except for that the defect, according to the photographs, was present on January 15th of 2017 when the crime scene investigator took that photo.
Correct.
Okay. Except for saying that something struck that windowsill, you can't say how that defect got there.
I cannot definitively give an absolute no.
Okay. Or who caused it to be put there.
I cannot.
And even if it did come from this incident, you can't say in which sequence of gunshots that defect was placed there, correct?
I cannot, no.
You talked about the documentation in the case file regarding the projectile found by Detective Overfield. Would you agree with me that based on the documentation in the case file, you were able to determine who collected it, the projectile, right?
Correct, yes.
Where the projectile went after Detective Overfield collected it,
Yes, that was documented.
as well as a general location of where that projectile was found?
That was all documented via report writing.
Okay.
Yes.
How did the failure to document the specific location with, say, a photograph of this projectile affect your analysis in any way?
How would the failure to do that?
Yes.
If the actual location of the defect, or excuse me, the projectile had been identified, so would have the condition of the actual projectile, which I didn't have any indications of. So I may have been able to come to some of the conclusions I've come to today at a much earlier point in time, as well as be able to be a little more probative in the possible ricochet area. So that's the...
Have you looked at the actual projectile?
No.
Okay. Did you make any requests to do so and were denied, or just you did not do that?
I didn't do that because it had already been tested and handled by multiple other experts, so I was going to rely then on their reports.
Okay. And you're not saying that because it was handled by other experts, it would have altered the condition of the projectile substantially, are you?
Oh, no.
Okay. And you're not saying that if you would have a photograph showing exactly where this projectile was found, you would have been able to determine definitively it was fired from Lieutenant Clayton's weapon, are you?
No.
Okay. Or who fired first?
No.
And if you would have had better documentation of the location of the projectile, you still would not have been able to determine in what sequence of gunshots this projectile was fired, correct?
Correct.
During your years of crime scene work, would you agree that in many occasions projectiles become fragmented?
Yes.
They can become fragmented by striking a surface, right?
Correct.
They can become fragmented even by entering a body.
Correct.
So the fact that if this projectile did strike this windowsill, that in and of itself does not mean that it would have, there are other reasons why a projectile would be fragmented simply by striking a hard surface, correct? And like you said, if it enters a body, it could become fragmented.
Correct.
So you're not saying because the projectile was fragmented, it must have hit this hard surface, are you?
Not definitively, it just can't be excluded.
And I believe you testified at the end of your direct examination that the projectile that we've been talking about, found by Detective Overfield, you agree that scientific analysis could not say it was fired from Lieutenant Clayton's gun, correct?
My understanding from the notes that I took that it could not be excluded or completely identified, so it was inconclusive.
Okay. And for that projectile to make that defect in the windowsill, and end up where it ended up when it was found by Detective Overfield, there are a variety of concrete pillars and barriers between that defect and where it was found, correct?
There is.
Now, you created the exhibits that we looked at earlier, placing Lieutenant Clayton and Markeith Loyd in positions so as to demonstrate the possibility of the scenario you have described, correct?
I wanted to demonstrate the possibility of the line of sight based on the other evidence that was in the case file.
Okay. And obviously, all of those exhibits assume that the defect in the windowsill was caused by a projectile, right?
That is the understanding, that if that is in fact a projectile strike mark, that the line of sight was available.
And all of those exhibits assume that the projectile found in the parking lot was what caused that defect, correct?
It includes the possibility that that defect could have been from that, or excuse me, that projectile could have been from that strike mark, or
And you
have
said
caused that strike mark.
I'm sorry. You said that you did review the surveillance video from Walmart, right?
I did.
And you touched on this, I believe, in your direct examination, but would you agree that the video footage that you reviewed and the images you reviewed do not show Lieutenant Clayton firing her firearm in that direction of that defect?
Are you asking if I have something definitive like a muzzle blast?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I don't.
Okay, and the video doesn't show her arm extended pointing a firearm in that area either, correct?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. When you added the figures in the diagram, the stick figures, I guess, you manually placed those on the diagrams yourself, correct?
Correct. They're for demonstrative processes.
And you manually placed them in the locations that you estimated them to be based on the still shots that you saw from the video, correct?
That's correct.
Now, am I correct? You did not import the video into some kind of a mapping program to put those figures in the exact locations they would be in the video?
No.
Okay. Didn't use any kind of geometry or trigonometry to analyze angles or anything, correct?
No.
The same with the line of sight sketches of the store and the parking lot that we showed the jury earlier. The locations of everything are estimates based on your view of the images in the video.
And my response to the Walmart on 2 occasions, yes, sir, and the location of the strike mark.
But all of those, the figures themselves of the representing the people were placed, they're estimates by you, right?
Yes, correct. Those are approximate locations.
The ricochet area that we've been talking about. The sketches that we showed earlier, it says possible ricochet area.
Yes.
Okay, and again, you use the word possible because you don't know if that is an actual ricochet area, correct?
Correct.
And the reason you created that ricochet area, the one barrier is basically the Walmart wall, right?
Correct.
We know it couldn't have gone beyond the wall because you didn't see any other strike marks.
Correct.
And the other ricochet area is basically the crime scene tape.
Well, it's an extension of the crime scene tape because the tape went over the vehicle and then was attached to another pillar. So the straight line is just an extension.
And if that crime scene tape was placed originally in a different location, that would have become your other barrier for that possible ricochet area, right?
I felt comfortable using that location because in the photographs that were documented by the agency, that's where the crime scene tape was. According to the information I obtained from the detective, he identified that location, the projectile, after the team had left. So I had no reason to believe that he had found that prior to the tape being moved to the location it was documented in, because he did specifically say it was after she had left. So that's why I used that as the perimeter.
And when you refer to the detective's statement about where it was found, I'm assuming you did not call Detective Overfield and show him the diagram and say, did you find the projectile in this area, correct?
No.
Okay. For the sake of argument, let's assume that Lieutenant Clayton based on your theory, did fire her firearm. The projectile struck that defect in the windowsill and ricocheted off into the area where Detective Overfield found it. Would you agree that none of your analysis indicates who fired the first shot?
That's correct.
Okay, or when the defendant first had his hand on his gun?
I have no way of knowing that information.
Or at what point he drew his firearm?
I have no information on that.
Or how long after Lieutenant Clayton ordered him to stop, he drew his firearm?
I have no information on that.
Your analysis does not show what the defendant did after Lieutenant Clayton ordered him to stop.
No.
Correct? Or why he pursued Lieutenant Clayton after she fell to the ground?
No.
Can I have one moment, Your Honor? Thank you, ma'am. No further questions.
Redirect.
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Cox, if you'd have been a crime scene investigator and responded to the scene of where the projectile was found, how would you have documented it?
If I had responded to the scene?
Yes.
I would have requested that it be marked and protected prior to my arrival. I would have responded back and continued with the same processing techniques that I had employed on the original documentation. If I was responsible for doing photography that day, I would have photographed it with and without scale. And if I was responsible for the Leica scanning, I would have Leica scanned it. If I was responsible for the video, I would have videoed it.
Okay, when you say you would have Leica scanned it, what exactly does that entail, and what would we be able to see if you had done that? Sorry.
You can put markers to reference items of evidence for your Leica scans, and then this is just based on my experience in working around it. That data can be then downloaded, and then sketches and things that I did can also be done.
Okay. Now, is it a fair description to say that the work that you were doing on this case, the photographs that you were taking, the video that you were taking, that you were doing that to see if you could exclude the possibility of Lieutenant Clayton having shot her weapon and having that projectile hit that window frame and bounce off?
My intention was to go there to see if it could or could not be included.
And ultimately your opinion, you're not here testifying that you know for a fact that Lieutenant Clayton fired first, and you know for a fact that that projectile came from her gun, correct?
Correct.
But you cannot exclude it.
Based on the additional information, all my case file review, no, I cannot.
In other words, all the evidence in this case cannot exclude that as having been a realistic possibility.
For me, the review that I did and the responsibilities that I had, and based on the new information, I cannot exclude it.
Thank you. That's all I have in this witness.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You are free to go. Folks, why don't we take a break? We've been at this for a bit, so 10 minutes.